Welcome to the live stream. My name's Tom Ravlic, author, journalist, and thank you for joining me. Some of you that are watching this will still be in lockdown. Being a Victorian, I know what it feels like, so stay safe and look after each other. One of the areas that suffered a lot, as you would have seen with my previous uh, live stream with Ben Eltham, is the art sector, and in particular, the comedy space has suffered quite a bit during the pandemic. People have had to innovate. People have had to create things outside of the usual stand-up comedy environment. So joining me to have a chat about that is Dan Ilic, who calls himself a self-proclaimed investigative humorist, but he's well known to a lot of people as one of Australia's more prominent stand-up comics and comic artists. Dan, thanks for joining me.
Tom, it's good to be with you.
Thank you. Now, look, before we delve into what COVID has done, and there are a couple of important things I need to do. Is it Ilic or is it Ilic? How do you prefer it pronounced?
I've decolonized. I'm Ilic. Are you Tom Ravlic or Tom Ravlic?
I tend to. It's been anglicised for years, so it's a Ravlic, but over there it's Ravlic.
Oh, there you go. Excellent. So, yeah, I for a long time in media, I was a young and up-and-coming media person, and all I wanted to ever do was be on television. And I figured, well, they don't give people TV jobs if you have a strange-sounding name. So for a long time, I anglicised it to Ilic because, Carlos Stefanovic is never going to win a gold Logie, but Karl Stefanovic may. So that's why I changed my name to Ilic for a long time. But then, and thankfully, around 2012, I decolonized live on air when I was hosting 702 Sydney one day when I was talking about how my ancestors say the name properly, and a whole bunch of listeners said, yeah, you should say it that way too. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. You're damn right I should. So I think back then that was the moment where I just embraced my Serbian roots and went the full itch. I went the full itch, Tom.
Well, I tend to tell people, the Balkans is a contested area because there are people who've got itches in it all over the place.
Very good. I'll have to. May I steal that for the future?
I probably won't hear you use it again, so fine. Look, when did comedy start for you?
Well, I don't know. I seem to have, as a little boy, all I ever wanted to do was tell jokes. There's my uncle has video of me telling jokes when I was like 7 years old in front of family, and my first time on stage was during when I was in Scouts and Guides. Oh, I wasn't in Guides, I was in Scouts, but I was in a show called the Cumberland Gang Show. I did have a small time in Brownies, but that was no, I fucked up that joke. Don't worry about it. So I was in a thing called the Cumberland Gang Show, which is a Scout and Guide stage production with about 150 kids on stage, all run off volunteer labour from parents. And it was a real magical time for me to learn how to be on stage, perform and write and produce and all that stuff. And then I joined, I just started doing comedy with my university group when I went to uni. And from that, we went to Melbourne Comedy Festival. And from our Melbourne Comedy Festival shows, we ended up doing shows on television, and from then I ended up getting the next show on television, and then the next show on television, and the next show. So I was pretty lucky. I had a real lucky break early on to kind of allow me to leverage what I'd done in the past to kind of get those breaks. So yeah, and the core function of being a comedian is getting up on stage and telling jokes. And in this day and age, in these unprecedented times, Tom, it's extremely difficult to do that. So yeah, no, it's so comedy started for me when I was very, very young.
Okay. And who gave you your first break? Who do you credit with giving you the first shot at the big time?
Well, I think my career is so lucky that I've had several little shots every step of the way. And I think the one that, really invested in me as me and really invested in me and who who I want to be as a performer and a creator was Anita Jacoby and Andrew Denton from the TV show Hungry Beast. They kind of saw in me, and Andy Neal and Paige Livingston and Jess Cohen and those guys as well. They kind of saw in me a burning desire to make comedy that burns the house down. And I think they really aligned themselves with that. So from that point onwards, I've always been interested in making satire and developing satire. And for a long time during that period, I was also making satirical comedy campaigns for lobby groups like Get Up and Greenpeace and places like that. So some of the earliest kind of Get Up ads I wrote and directed and produced, and they were, really funny kind of satirical bits. And it was I couldn't believe people were paying me, a few $1,000s to make jokes about the government on television. And that was the best fun you could ever have as a 20-something-year-old. So yeah, I've had many different mentors kind of give me breaks at various different times. From Chris McDonald when we were at university together, putting me in one of his comedy plays, the Beatification of Newt Burton, the Great Viagra Robbery, to The Third Degree, to John Pinder, who saw our shows at the Big Laugh Festival and encouraged us to go to Melbourne. And then John Pinder once again loved our sketch comedy so much he paired us up with Nick Murray, who is one of Australia's biggest independent producers of television in Australia. And we made the Ronnie Johns Half Hour together back when Jigsaw was a very early, very nascent company, very fledgling company, which is him and his wife. And now it's one of the biggest independent production companies in Australia. So I've been very, very lucky along the way with people giving me breaks and seeing my potential. Most recently, I have been lucky enough to be a Bertha Fellow, it's a foundation based in South Africa. They support artists and activists and lawyers and people of that ilk who work in climate action. And they've invested in my show, A Rational Fear, over the last year, helping me do jokes about climate change and do jokes about the government in Australia. So I've been very lucky to have little breaks here and there.
Now, one of the things with live performers is getting energy from the audience, right? How does that work for you as a performer when you get up on stage? What happens before you get on stage? How do you adjust to meet the crowd?
Well, the kind of shows that I do are usually written bespoke for that night. If you're a stand-up, you might write 5 or 6 minutes a week and try that out until you've got gradually build a 50-minute show that you can do at Comedy Festival. But the shows we make, like A Rational Fear, which is my show, when we put that on, we are writing for 2 weeks before we put it on, and then when we put it on and it goes. So I kind of liken it to winding up a rubber band. So the idea is that you kind of put all this work into it. You're winding, and you feel like, yeah, it's pretty taut. It's ready to go. Then you step out on stage and you cut it, and it just powers through and explodes all over the audience's face, we hope. So that's kind of how I liken to it. And a great audience is just a very special thing to behold. And we've had so many great audiences over the years. One of my favorite audiences, I remember 2 great audiences that I loved. One was 2019 at the Powerhouse in Brisbane, where we performed A Rational Fear to a sellout crowd there, who were all there learning about how to communicate climate change to their own communities through the Climate Reality program. And that was great, a great show. And we stepped out on stage to start the show. But just before we stepped on stage to start the show, the producer came backstage and said, "Oh, Dan, there's something we should tell you. You aren't allowed to say one word. And that word is Adani." And this was a show about climate change in Queensland, and we weren't allowed to say the word Adani. So we were like furiously rewriting scripts, making sure that, we weren't allowed to say the word Adani. So, the state government's the client, so, so be it. So I was kind of rewriting things on the fly. 5 minutes before we went on stage, then we went out on stage, and I said to the audience, "Now, before we start tonight, there's one word that we are not allowed to say. And 400 people yelled back, Adani! Adani! And I said, so if you know what the word is, Adani, there'll be a special prize, Adani, at the end of the show, Adani. And I was like, great. Well, we'll see if anyone knows what that word is. It was just a wonderful special moment. That was incredible. And then that show was so powerful. It was great. We were 5 comedians on stage talking about climate change with Hilary Bambrick, who was one of the climate counsellors and an epidemiologist. She was fantastic as well. And then the other audience that I absolutely have an incredible memory of was performing in Tarin Kowt in Afghanistan in front of the troops, the Australian, Dutch and US troops. And my brothers had served in the Middle East over the years, and they told me a really great tip. They said, if you go to the welfare hut where people phone home, talk to their parents, talk to their families, there's graffiti all over the walls there. It's like the one place you're allowed to be subversive. So I took my pad and my pen and I went to the welfare hut and I just wrote down all the jokes and awful things that were said on these walls, completely unspeakable on this podcast, Tom, just horrible stuff. And I just read it out one by one and people just lost their shit. This stuff that's meant to be private was being spoken about on stage. It was just, I do remember one joke and it was awful, incredibly misogynistic. It was something like, hey girls, how does it know to feel that you're going to be going home and you're going to be a 4 again? And I thought, oh, well, that's awful. That's awful. But I read it out and the audience just lost it. So it was a really strange performing experience doing that tour. We did 5 shows in 10 days across the Middle East for the troops in Afghanistan. And that was a very unique occasion, but one of my absolute favorite audiences.
What do you do to psych up before you go on?
Usually I'm in a bit of a panic, particularly if I'm doing Irrational Fear, because I'm usually just writing at the last minute or trying to make sure the script is solid before we go out. So that's my process. My process is to kind of panic and finish writing the script as much as I can. I usually leave 3 jokes at the start of the show that I normally do at the start of the show to last. So then I kind of ask around the room, people try it out on people before we go out. So that's pretty good. When I'm doing stand-up, usually I have stand-up in my brain and I'm just trying to put myself in a comfortable place where I'm comfortable and confident to go out on stage and make an audience laugh. And it's a real great privilege to have that job, to be able to go out there and just have a tell jokes and make people smile for a little bit is really fun.
Now, in February 2020, March 2020, everything hit the wall. The coronavirus, the impact of the coronavirus lockdowns began. You've just spoken about how vital audiences are to the artwork that you perform. How quickly did the reality of the coronavirus pandemic hit for you?
Well, pretty quickly. We were just starting to ramp up for Melbourne Comedy Festival back in March. So Melbourne Comedy Festival last year was in April, I believe. So February we started doing weekly podcasts so we could build an audience to get down to Comedy Festival. We started a Patreon, and then and we put tickets on sale. And I remember listening back recently to episodes from back then. I was like, well, I don't know if this is going to go ahead, but we've got Melbourne Comedy Festival tickets on sale. So, buy them in case this whole thing blows over. Boy, did we make a mistake there. So it certainly didn't blow over. And of course, Comedy Festival was cancelled that year. Thankfully, the producers we work with buffeted some of the costs there, so they ate some of the costs associated with doing festival runs there, including registration, which is expensive, and venue hire and things like that. So that we're extremely grateful for them to do that. But for many comics who were part of the festival, it was a real struggle because lots of money goes into printing posters and marketing and ad spend, and you can spend $8,000 to try and sell $8,000 worth of tickets easy. That's something I've done in the past. I've spent $16,000 to sell $8,000 worth of tickets. When you go to a comedy festival as a comedian and you're not someone who has a TV show, you are there to lose money because that's what everybody does. So it's not the most fun festival because it's such a financial stress. So to cancel it was almost a little bit of a relief that we didn't have to sell tickets in that time. So that was good. And then when we went back, we immediately, all the other live shows, they evaporated as well, and shoots that I was planning, for my business, which is making, corporate videos and ads and stuff like that, has completely disappeared. TVCs that were booked in completely disappeared. And then I had the most fortunate luck of getting a phone call from the ABC saying, hey, we want to do something for the comedians who've lost all their jobs. Can you jump on board and be the showrunner and executive producer of this show that we're trying to get up? It's a sketch comedy platform for comedians to get some money during COVID and during lockdown. I was like, yeah, that sounds like the best fun. And so from where I'm sitting now, Tom, in my bedroom, I was the executive producer of a TV show called Home Alone Together, where I sat on Zoom calls from, much like we've all experienced from lockdown, where I sat on Zoom calls from 8 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock at night, organizing people to make television, and reading scripts and talking to talent and, getting people over the line to make stuff and, running a team of 40 from my bedroom. So that was extremely lucky to get that job. If I hadn't had that job, I would have been in very, very tough situation. So just stuff has completely evaporated. And once again, right now I'm in Sydney, and I've seen easily $20,000 to $30,000 worth of work evaporate out of my pocket. So that's 2 months of work for me, and I can already see August disappearing. There is one $3,000 job in August that I think will stay, but the rest are gone and won't return. So that's really, that's really tough. But there's so many. I'm in a very unique position right now where I'm a comedian that's had a bit of luck over the last year to have had this fellowship and to have a fairly healthy Patreon, which means that this month anyway, the Patreon is the thing that's going to pay the bills in my household, which is extraordinary. Like to think that $1,200 that's going to come through is through the generous donations of people who love the work I create with Irrational Fear. That's the thing that's going to pay for rent, my doctor's appointment today that I had with the orthopedic surgeon. It's going to pay for food and registration of software and stuff that you need when you run a podcast. That's going to pay for all that. Yeah. So without that, I would be really struggling. So I'm in a very unique position where I'm quite stable right now. But if this lockdown continues another 2 months, then I don't know how I'll pay the bills. I'll have to duck into illiquid assets and sell some of those, which I don't want to do, but if I have to, then that's what I have to do. Yeah.
How important is the innovation that's happened online, whether it be the GoFundMes or the Patreon or and platforms like StreamYard that we're using now to continue people's sort of ability to perform?
Oh, extremely important. So for our podcast, Irrational Fear, immediately when the lockdown started, we moved online. Previous to that, we were traveling to FBI Radio in Sydney to record in the radio studio there. But as soon as lockdown happened, or right before lockdown happened, I went to JB Hi-Fi and bought a bunch of gear and gave Lewis Hobber, my co-host of the show, enough gear that he would sound great coming down the radio, or coming down NBN into my roadcaster over StreamYard. And then StreamYard allows us to do live streams to an audience, and the audience
Yep.
is small, but it's a value add to our Patreon members. So our funnel is kind of our funnel kind of looks like this. It's kind of we give away videos for free, podcasts for free, memes for free, all that stuff. All the stuff we make goes out for free, and then we drag people through to our Substack, which we collect the emails for, and then we ask people in our Substack and on the podcast to donate to Patreon. And then the Patreon members get all the same content, but also they get the live stream link as soon as we go live, so they can go and watch the show themselves. So that's pretty cool for them, and they support the show. So it's without that kind of infrastructure there's no way we can really support ourselves. Normally we would do live shows once a month, and that would make us enough money to pay everyone pretty well. Like we could pay everyone a couple $100 to be on stage with us, which is really great. I can't really pay anyone currently out of the Patreon, except for the person who edits the show. They get paid, and we're trying to get enough money that I can pay for an assistant to do a lot of the publishing on a Friday, so they will get paid out of the Patreon, but no one else really kind of gets paid out of the Patreon except for those two people. So ideally, the Patreon would get to 10 grand a month, and I could pull a wage and also pay people to come and do the show as well, and give everyone proper money to come and participate. So until that happens, it's a growing process.
Do you see the Patreon type scenario developing further, Dan, in terms of it becoming a permanent component of what you do?
Yeah, no, the Patreon I'm locked in with. I'm going to continue doing that, and that's going to be a permanent thing ongoing, because the show costs money to make, and it's hard to keep paying that out of my own pocket. So it's a real thrill that people love the show enough to give us $10 a month to make it. One guy gives us $800 a month, which is extraordinary. So that is extremely helpful. And it means that there's a permanence there. Like I've never had a proper job in my life, except for when I was a wee person working in Franklin's Woolworths for $8 an hour. So this is this kind of gives me a sense of stability, and it means I know what I can spend money on in the future. It's a very rare thing to kind of have that kind of level of stability when you're a comedian. But it's a real I'm very lucky to have the small amount of money coming through that I have.
Now, what people sometimes don't realize is when you're doing what we're doing now, you've got an annual subscription. If you choose to pay for that, you've got your hardware. If you want a 4K Brio Logitech webcam, it's going to set you back $340. So all that money's got to come from somewhere, right?
Yeah, let me talk about what I've got on my system right now. So Omni, that's $15 a month, sometimes $40 a month because of data transfer. If I get too popular, I end up having to pay triple the amount of money to the server. I've got StreamYard, which is $35 a month. I've got Photoshop, which is $70 a month. I've got this Rodecaster, which is $1,500. I've got this GH4 camera, which is $1,500. I've got this a Logitech camera, which is $200. I've got this A10 Mini Blackjack design thing, which I haven't yet to work with my haven't got to work yet. That was $400. This microphone's $100. It's so expensive to have a podcast. Don't have a podcast. This is what I'm saying. Listen to mine. Subscribe to mine. Like it, and then when you've got you want to pay people to make the podcast. So I've my producer. He charges $150 or $100 a week to kind of edit it, which is great. And then there's more. So that's $400 a month. So it's like, like far out. Like it's not. There's expenses.
It's interesting that we talk about this at this time, because often people don't think about what goes on when you've got the veneer, the cock face. You got to look at. Sometimes you got to tell people what goes on behind in the gears, right?
It's so funny. Like there's this complete disconnect with people who are faces on television and versus what they earn. People think if you have a face on television or your face has been on television that you must be completely loaded and you have tons of money. And it's like, no, I'm trying to get my face on television so I could have a permanent job on television so I can have tons of money. But there's no correlation between that. Like unless you're hosting the project 5 nights a week, you're not earning a lot of money.
No, well, is there anything else, given the time that you've had and the way in which things have panned out and the fun you're having now, but it's all great. But is there anything else you want to do at some time in the future?
In what context? What do you mean?
In terms of career?
Oh, me? Yeah. I want to do heaps. So I want to get a sitcom up on TV, which we're trying to pitch at the moment. I want to get a couple of other entertainment formats up on stage, on TV. I would love to get Rational Fear up on TV, which has been a pet project of mine for the last 8 years, trying to get this up on TV, which has been it's been an exhausting process. It's all to do with timing, and I've missed a lot of the opportunities, but that's okay. And I want to all of this. There's so much stuff I want to do. I want to make feature films. I'm thinking about becoming a talent agent for some young comedians who are really about to pop. I would love to figure out ways to facilitate comedy in Australian comedians and Australian comedy in a way that is sustainable and that people can have longevity in their careers and are looked after in meaningful ways. So, look, I would love to create. I would love to create platforms for comedians to make great things and to say something about the world. And largely Irrational Fear has been that. Like, it's been I created it as a TV concept in order to kind of get have a space for young comedians to say something about the world in a really funny and meaningful way, not just kind of on your standard panel show, but like actually delve a little deeper. And that's been largely successful as a podcast and on stage. But it would be great on TV. It would just be really, really good. There's no difference between what we're doing on Irrational Fear or what Q&A does, except we're extremely entertaining and Q&A is extremely boring. So that's the only difference, as I could see.
Is there, given a lot of comedy, stand-up and I guess sitcoms as well, but do you see yourself sort of doing something like I guess a frequent sort of comedy festival type thing that's streamed live?
Yeah, that'd be a great idea. I mean, it's those things require a lot of sweat and effort to kind of make, and I think that's a really great idea. And if someone wants to make it, I'd love to be part of it. And to be honest, Splendor in the Grass was really good at trying to create something similar for that for their Splendid XR. So on stage they had a virtual Splendor in the Grass, and they had a virtual comedy tent as well, which is great. And they were going to beam one out of Sydney, but because of lockdown, it just became a bit too risky to get the Giant Dwarf stage. We were going to make that a Giant Dwarf in Redford. And it got a bit too risky to actually get people together to actually make the thing and beam it. So they did it out of Melbourne, which is fine. But that's a great idea. Good idea. Good idea, Tom. Make it happen. We'll do it.
Dan, you mentioned your Patreon, and it would seem to be fitting to let you tell people where they can find you online and where they can find the podcast, Irrational Fear.
Yeah, well, the podcast is Irrational Fear. Just go to irrationalfear.com. Give me your email and I'll spam you funny things for life. That's the promise. That's the promise. And if you want to sponsor Irrational Fear, if you like the kind of stuff we've made, we've had over 1 million hits on videos in the last year alone. Like on Twitter, the videos we put up have been seen by over 1 million people. Last week, we're in the New York Times because we made fun of the government's COVID campaign, which was really, really funny. So, we're everywhere. But these things do cost money to make. And we would love to spend more money making more impressive bits of content, but it does cost money. One of the things I'm most proud of was at the 2019-2020 bushfires. I was sitting on the beach in Bondi with like ash being washed upon me, and just wondering, like, what can I do here to do something? I need to do something about this moment we're in. And I said to myself, well, I don't hold a hose, mate. So what else can I do? And I said, well, I can make comedy videos. And so I texted a bunch of writers, producers, directors, and comedians, and asked them if I can get together enough resources to make something substantial about how Australia's climate policy has been kind of eroded over the last 30 years by the carbon lobby. Would you be interested in participating? And they said yes. And then I found some money from some folks who I know are good for it, including my old friend Dick Smith, who gave us, a few $1,000s, and along with another person, and we managed to kind of pull a small budget together to pay everyone for a few weeks to make this incredible video about the Australian bushfires and how we got there with our terrible climate change policy. And Tim Minchin jumped on board to voice it, which was amazing. And that video has been seen by 1 million people on Tim's Twitter feed, and it's seen by hundreds of thousands of people on YouTube. And so, the good stuff, like the really good, potent stuff that we want to spend time on, does cost money, unfortunately. So please head to patreon.com/irrational fear and give us some money. And if we do get to 10 grand a month, we'll be able to make more of that content more often.
I've been talking to Dan Ilic, self-proclaimed investigative humorist, but all-round good guy, host of Irrational Fear. Dan, thank you for joining me, and check his stuff out on the podcast and at Patreon.
Good to be with you, Tom.
Thank you.